In 2018, I only just caved in. I played Pokemon Go when that was a thing. And so that got me going a little bit. And that sort of set the stage for the crazy really seeping in by a pretty significant margin. And every single time I chase a rare bird, there'd be people there, are you doing a big year? And my answer was always, no, I'm having a big year, but I'm not doing a big year. That's crazy. I had a feeling that even though I go into the year saying, I'm not going to do stupid stuff, I'm still going to end up doing some stupid stuff.
Well, it's finally September and the dog days of birding are behind us, and fall migration is well underway, signaling the end of the summer breeding season and birds booking their flights south for the winter. No passport needed. Luckily, there are no direct flights from the breeding grounds in the north to the wintering grounds in the south, which means we here in southern Ontario are graced by the presence of southbound migrants. And when the wind is just right, shorebirds and seabirds pass through, many of them stopping to refuel at various mudflats and waterways where they fill their bellies with little critters before taking up the next leg of their journey. Some birds, like jaegers and southern migrating gulls like the Sabine's gull, don't always stop as they pass over the lake. In that case, birders who want to count such birds as Long-tailed Jaeger, Parasitic Jaeger, or any other rarity that happens to be blown off course, head to the beaches for the annual lake watch. This is especially important if you're doing a big year. And in the case of today's guest and myself, in 2022, we were lake watching on opposite sides of Lake Huron. Danny Bernard was looking for Jaegers for his Michigan State big year, and I was scanning the waters for a long-tailed Jaeger to complete my Jaeger trifecta for my Canada big year. Luckily for me, birders like Danny were communicating from the US side whenever they had a sighting, and that helped me get to see my only long-tailed Jaeger of the year. I should have had them up in the Yukon in the summer, but that's another story for another show. Suffice it to say, we both got our birds and celebrated in style. Pie for Danny and a steak dinner for me. Though we didn't know it at the time, we were destined to cross paths again. This time, instead of across the lake, we met over the internet. So, since I need to wrap up this introduction, and without further blather from me, let's log into our Zoom meeting and check in with Danny Bernard and his record-breaking 2022 Michigan big year.
Tell me about your inspiration into birding. How long have you been a birder and how old are you now? I am early 26. I've been a birder for about 5.5, 6 years. My dad has been a birder. He took an ornithology course when he was in college before I was even born, and that got him into a love of birding. And for as long as I can remember, he's been trying to get me to become a birder. And for whatever reason, I always dragged my heels. Like just typical stubborn kid. I don't want to do that. That sounds boring. And in 2018, I finally gave in to him a little bit, toes in the water.
I got into birding in 2012 after being a unwilling participant on many bird walks with Sue. And it wasn't even her influence that got me into birding. It was seeing the movie The Big Year. And because I was always the kind of person who wanted to make lists and charts and graphs and did things with spreadsheets before spreadsheets were even a thing, when you had a basic version on your IBM PC. So that's the reason I got into it. What was the reason that prompted you to finally follow your father into the field, so to speak?
I don't really know. I think that in 2018, I only just caved in. I played Pokemon Go when that was a thing. And so that got me going a little bit.
And Pokemon Go is like a birding adventure, and it's like geocaching. Right. I was a geocacher until I started birding. So I actually wonder how many kids who did Pokemon Go eventually got into something like birding.
I'd imagine there's a correlation there.
You were chasing sort of phantoms and ghosts in Pokemon Go, but then you discover there's a world of real things out there.
Right.
What was the first memory you have of really birding and getting binoculars? And what was the first thing you saw that made you go, wow, what have I been missing?
One of my earliest experiences, like I had just started birding a couple of weeks later, was my dad took me to McGee Marsh during the biggest week in American birding, which was an overwhelming experience, and it was an incredible amount of fun. And added, I don't even know how many lifers, like over 100 in my first couple of weeks of birding, including birds like little gull, which I was like, only seen a few of them, and it was like life bird number 80 or something like that. And it was an experience that was incredible. And then for the next few years even, I still pretty much only ever birded during migration, or my dad's really big into county level birding. He has a goal to get 100 birds in every county in Michigan. He only has one county left to go now, but I would go on a lot of these camping trips with him and do a little bit of birding here and there, but I still wasn't like crazy about it. I wasn't one of us, people who have objectively lost their minds in a very good way. Until finally in 2020, during the height of COVID, on top of dealing with all the stresses from the pandemic there, I was also dealing with a bunch of personal mental health issues. And I discovered that birding was the perfect escape and release from everything. I started just every day going out for a walk. And before I knew about driving all around the county for birds I lived in Lapeer County at that time, and I ended up doing what I referred to as my first accidental big year in the county, just in the second half of the year, ending as the number 2 birder in the county by the end of the year. And that sort of set the stage for the crazy really seeping in. As I was getting more interested in it, my dad got me a spotting scope as a Christmas present in 2021. Everything was lined up.
That is very interesting and different way of getting into birding, because only diagnosed as an adult with ADHD and OCD. The birders who have come into birding because of realizing that their mind gets rid of all the other thoughts, how do you feel that helped you?
Especially going through April, May, June of 2021 was some of the worst period of my life. And it started a little bit in May during spring migration, but until June really that I started going out every day. And the turnaround between May 1st and late July, that 3-month period there was a complete 180 in my entire life. And not necessarily all of that was the result of birding. I was also talking to a therapist, but birding was an incredible factor in going from one of the lowest points in my life to probably one of the highest points of my life in just a few months.
This issue when it comes to birding, that is always an inspiring story. And when you're amongst a group of birders, we can just walk up, look at the bird, say, oh, cool, and then turn around, and no one feels like you've insulted them by not engaging in conversation, because whether it's that brief interlude and then it's gone and it's over and you can go back to what you were doing.
Yeah. And it's amazing all of the friendships and relationships you can form in birding, whether you're just like a casual birder or you meet a lot of people if you're like a chaser and you run into these people over and over again, you develop relationships with them. It's amazing some of those things that form through birding.
And were you chasing birds before?
Chased a little bit prior to 2022, but not really much. Mostly just like my dad was a chaser, so I'd go tag along with him. In 2022, though, I started chasing by myself. It really started early January. We had definitely the first and only chaseable prairie falcon we've ever had in Michigan. And so my dad and I were planning on going birding. We were like, we're going to get on the highway going west. Right before we got to the highway, the word came that bird was just a little bit to our east. We got on the other ramp and headed east. And that was like the catalyst for everything, was that first chase. And then after that, we went up to the UP, Michigan's Upper Peninsula, for a few days and didn't successfully get a couple of birds. We were up there for had been hanging around by the time we went up there, but still added a lot of good traditional, more boreal kind of bird or cold weather birds, including a few lifers I have since seen many times, like sharp-tailed grouse, pine grosbeaks, evening grosbeaks, those kind of birds. As January started to progress, really, I started chasing for monk birds. After the first few days of the year, really heavily birding at the start of the year, because I was planning on doing an Oakland County big year, like a smaller scale big year. And I did January 4th January 4th, 46 birds. And by the 4th, I was up to 60 or 70, which was a pretty crazy start to the year. I might be able to get to 100 for January, but I realized I'd have to leave Oakland County to do it. So that prairie falcon was really like the catalyst of, okay, I'm definitely going to go for this 100. I still didn't really know if 100 was possible for January until I ended up hitting it January 20th with plenty of time to spare. And we have a Michigan bird listing Facebook page, and one of the birders on there said, you should try to see if you can hit 120. And at first when he said that, I was like, that's funny. But I was like, back of my head said, yeah, you can see if you get 120. And I did. I ended up hitting 121. And by the end of January, I was, man, this feels good. I don't want this to end. I'm going to do it again in February, trying to hit 100 again in February. And I chased a few more birds along the way. A trip up to the UP got us house in solitaire. And on the way back, we got varied thrush and Barrow's goldeneye. And I kept doing that for this month birding, really. Driving all over the state doing stupid stuff, like driving halfway across the state for a search scope. And then I'm going to see hundreds in migration. And around March, more rare birds started to show up. We had a Jeer falcon, a Eurasian widgeon, and I was chasing after all of them. And by this point, I was number 1 in the state for the year by pretty significant margin. I think I was already up to 10 or 15 species ahead of anyone else. And every single time I chase a rare bird, there'd be people there be like, are you doing a big year? And my answer was always, no, I'm having a big year, but I'm not doing a big year. That's crazy. Maybe I might decide to try to go for 300, but I don't even know if that's really possible. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I was working full time. I was an assistant store manager at a grocery store. And so that didn't give me that much flexibility necessarily for my schedule. I couldn't just drop everything and go whenever I wanted. And also the gas costs in 2022 it was crazy.
That changed a lot of plans for many people who were doing big years, some of them in Ontario who are pooling and shorter trips. So how did you manage the travel with the gas prices?
Fortunately, I got a little lucky in how many birds I was able to get in one trip. First example of that was probably the trip when I finally decided that I was going to do a big year, which was in mid-ish April. There was the cinnamon teal that showed up on the west side of the state that I chased after. And then while I was over there, looked at cinnamon teal, a western meadowlark was seen only about south of there. And in my head, I'm like, oh, that's not that far. At the same spot as western meadowlark, I got Brewer's blackbird. And that day was, okay, I guess I'm going to do this. I didn't think 337, which was the number that I ended at, would be the goal. But from there, I got lucky. Like I said, the number of times where I was able to get 3 to 5 really good birds in a single day. Or my dad also, big birder, I was able to ride with him for a good amount of cases, especially a few chases that were really far away. That was really nice to not have to bear the burden of those. Other than that, it was almost like every paycheck I was looking at how much money I had and going, okay, this is this many miles. I also wasn't ever paying for hotels. I bought a full-out mattress pad that I put in the back of my Subaru Crosstrek. Yes, it was just big enough for me to fit like head to toe if I laid my back seat down and laid flat. And I spent probably over 100 nights throughout the year in that.
That is something I have done and have never regretted, though I haven't had a comfortable mattress to sleep in. It was basically squeezed onto the back seat and just sleeping like that. But definitely in the places I've been, the weather has been summer-like or hot, and never nights where the temperatures dip down pretty significantly.
In the winter parts of the beginning of the year, I wasn't doing that as much. And so I didn't really have any crazy nights. There was a day like the one we went up to the Upper Peninsula in January where it was, I wanted at 20 minus 25 Fahrenheit. I'm not sure what that is in Celsius.
It's pretty cold.
I never had to sleep in those conditions. The coldest conditions I ever really slept in up in the northern lower peninsula, and it got down to maybe 14 Fahrenheit. So that wasn't like unbearable, but it was a nice sleeping bag and a very uncomfortable night, but it was worth it.
What was the bird you were chasing up there?
A black vulture.
In order to count Ontario black vultures, we've had to go to the Niagara River overlooking the Whirlpool Rapids and stand there for hours, sometimes just waiting for the vultures to fly over the river. And then part of its wing must be in Canada at some point. And that's usually in January when we're doing it as well. Since then, we did have 2 more that showed up in the Niagara region, just sitting on post. There was no question of. We did have a limpkin that did not come across the river. So I got to watch it from Canada, but it was not one of my official big year.
Our limpkin we had in Michigan last year was a river that you had to put in 2 miles away in a canoe or a kayak and paddle out to. So that one made us work for it.
How many of these one-off birds were there that helped you set the record?
Oh, I don't have an exact number on that. Michigan, in a given year, we usually have around 50 species that show up, give or take a few. I don't remember the exact number, but last year we had 362. So we had a really interesting year in Michigan last year. We had 6 or 7 first state record birds. We had lots of those sort of second tier rarities that showed up. Birds like tufted duck, Eurasian widgeon, cinnamon teal. But we got like almost all of them last year. It was a very good year in Michigan to do a big year as far as just how many birds were showing up.
What was the rarest bird you chased?
The first American record of the common redshank, 4th of July, ruining a lot of American celebration plans for the holiday. It was a one-day wonder at Point Mouillet State Game Area that I was working that day. And I got out of work at 4:30 p.m. and I was just like itching. I have to go. And I raced down there through the holiday traffic, got there, got the bird. And that was the rarest bird. And to me, one of those like shorebirds, those type of birds that they're great, but they don't look necessarily that special. But even still, that was like an incredible experience. Beyond that bird, probably the rarest bird that felt the most special was we had a variegated flycatcher that showed up in the tip of the Michigan thumb that was an awesome bird.
Our rarest bird in 2022 was the marsh sandpiper, which
Yes.
is a bird that a lot of people from Michigan and New York and came up to see.
My dad wouldn't got that one. I would have gone for it, but I didn't have my enhanced license or passport or anything like that. So I couldn't get across the border. And I still haven't bothered getting around to getting that, but like I need to, because it's not going to be too long until a really good bird jumps up in Ontario there that I want to get.
So at what point in the year did you realize that the record was within sight, and how did you plan for that?
So I realized it was in sight in late May, because going into early May, my goal was still to hit 300 for the year. And this crazy part of me that I still don't understand kept thinking, that's not possible. I can't hit 300 for the year. And then I ended up hitting 300 on May 9th, just like a couple weeks after, thinking it wasn't going to be possible to hit 300 for the year. I didn't realize how many birds that were not necessarily rarities, but uncommon, how it's fairly easy, for lack of a better term, a lot of them would be to get. And so I hit 300 on May 19th, which I believe is the earliest that I'm aware of anyone hitting it in Michigan for the year ever. At that point, I was 25, 30 birds ahead of most other people in the state. And I started thinking, like, looking at what birds I could get, going, okay, 335 was the record. I don't know if that's possible. Unfortunately, June was a really dead month. The only bird I added all of June was a black-billed whistling duck. But kind of probably fortunate for my job and for my financial situation, because I had a full month of recovery after the chaos of May migration, where I was on the road nonstop, and went into July feeling more refreshed. Started July with a bang. We had that southern lapwing that showed up at an airport in Billings, Michigan, followed immediately by that common redshank. And there was also an unchaseable red-cockaded woodpecker and a bird that I was not personally able to chase, a billed hummingbird, that all showed up right around the same time. That kind of reinvigorated everything. And then from there, I just started chasing every single thing that showed up until around September, when I was at 300 days. I started looking at birds like jaegers and Sabine skull, and started trying to spend a lot of time freezing my butt off on the shore of a lake with storms coming in, hoping for those birds.
On the opposite side of the river,
September 22nd,
from where I was looking for jaegers.
Was that probably on September 22nd-ish?
Probably was, yeah.
We had long-tailed jaegers.
Yeah, we were all messaging back and forth between the Michigan birders.
It was probably one of the highlights for the year, because we started off the day with great looks at a Sabine skull blade and right in front of us. A pair of jaegers come by, and then the day started to die down a little bit, and most of the people on our side started to head out. And I kept telling everyone, stick around until 7 o'clock. It's going to pick back up at 7 o'clock. And at this point, it's like 1 p.m. And everyone, okay, you're crazy. But by 7, there were maybe a dozen of us left there, when we had a parasitic Jaeger come right over our heads, like 50 feet overhead. And we're all like, yeah, we're all excited about that. And then as we're looking at that, someone called out, long-tailed Jaeger. We realized just also right over our heads, there's a long-tailed Jaeger too. And so the people who were there credited me a little bit, that like they said they were planning on heading out, but and a few people were like, I stuck around because you seemed so sure, that I was like, man, he must be onto something, that I paid off.
A number of Ontario birders who are like that. We have our lake watch in Burlington that everybody does. And the day I went was so darn cold.
It happened to me a little bit with the first bird that originally I counted. I since, after the fact, looked at, maybe I shouldn't have counted that. And so I had a black-legged kittiwake, white point bird was an inventory, that the bird counter ID'd, and that I'm positive that I was on the spec as far away as I could see, basically. I couldn't really make out any plumage details on it. And at the time, I was like, okay, the counter says it's a black-legged kittiwake. But then actually, like a week later, removed any doubt on that bird. We had that one that hung out on Belle Isle. We were viewing from 15 feet away. That was like, okay, this is a much more comfortable situation.
I was very glad later in the year, in the fall, that I had a good look at a prairie warbler at Long Point, because early in the year, pretty sure I saw one, but other people were saying, I think it was a female magnolia, because I didn't want that to be the sighting that someone might say, no, I think you were wrong.
I had a Western kingbird that I did not count that was like that, where basically only thing I can say for certain is that it was a yellow-bellied species. Couldn't rule out Cassins or Couchins or tropical, really, from the look I got at all. But I was thinking it had to have been a Western. Well, there's no way I could say that.
For a lot of, even in Ontario, that is the default one, because we get the Western kingbirds fairly regularly, but in the last 12 months, we've had a tropical kingbird and a Cason's kingbird.
We had our first state record, Cassin's Black, non-chaseable tropical slash couches that showed up. So both of those had already been seen that year. So that especially added to the Westerns, probably what it was.
The lesson many big ear birders have is that if you're thinking of going for a bird, don't ever say,
Right,
maybe
just
I'll
go.
go tomorrow, or maybe I'll have lunch and then go. It's always get in the car and go.
I've done that a lot. The fact, looking at birds that like, oh, I could have chased this bird. Or if I had been at this place this day, which I was planning on being there, I would have gotten Pomeranian Jaeger and a Pacific loon, but I didn't go there that day. But I should have gone there that day. I was planning on going there that day.
And when did you hit your goal of 330?
At 3:30, yeah, in early October when I hit 3:30. Pretty much out of birds that I could expect, three that were left that I was really hoping for were harlequined up, which we get pretty much every winter, but not always chaseable and not always every winter. That black-legged kittiwake, which I was hoping I'd see at one of my sea watches. By that point, I had already gotten Parasitic Jaeger and Long-tailed Jaeger in September. So that black-legged kittiwake was my last, and Pomeranian Jaeger, but they were getting late in the year for those, my last sea watch birds. And Brant, we get almost every other year or so, usually in November or October. I was hoping one of those would show up. But other than that, I was sitting around 3:30 with 3:35 being the records, thinking, okay, like this is doable. And I got really lucky. My dad and I were up in the northern Lower Peninsula, and a Vermilion flycatcher showed up, central Upper Peninsula, and it was like just far enough away that if we left right then, we'd get there before dusk. So my dad was like, all right, fine. We drove up there, we got that bird, and then shortly after that, I was spending some time with Fish Point. I had harlequined up fly by.
Places to go to in the spring.
It's incredible up there. And I've actually only ever been there in the spring a couple times because I didn't really start going there till fall migration last year, and I haven't really gone up there much this year. And then we had a Brant show up, and Brant was number 335.
Oh.
That was the bird that I was working that morning, and the bird showed up. Some fisherman found it while he was out fishing on the pier in the western side of the state in Pimpwater, Michigan, which is a small little town. And I got out of work and I raced up there, and I was looking at the clock and thinking, I don't know if I'm going to get there. Got up there, ran into a gentleman named Joe Leeper, who was the number 2 person in the state for the year. He was already there on the bird. Went and got the bird, and that was the one that tied it for me. And it was like awesome. Like at least I've matched it now.
What do you do to celebrate a bird like that or a lifer? Do you have a thing?
Now, I didn't until like later in the year last year. Last year I added 70-something lifers. It was crazy. So my celebration now, lifer pie, I have a slice to celebrate. I had a day where I added 5 lifers last May. We had a Lewis's woodpecker that showed up, got that one. After that, went over to a nearby facility and we spotted a Franklin's that headed down south. We had a Bell's Vireo that has shown up almost annually. I don't know if it's been there this year, but for the last several years, then one spot a Bell's Vireo has come to that. Got that. I had another bird that day and I can't remember what it was, but I ended the chasing after a Connecticut warbler, which I was able to get. And so those all 5 birds that I got that day were really good life birds. And then the next day I added long-billed dowelsher and king rail, both as life birds. And so I was like a 2-day stretch where I would have had for a pie. It's tradition there. But these days, slice of pie is more befitting because I only add a few lifers here or there. Other than when I take a trip somewhere else, like I went to Texas this spring and added 74 lifers in 6 days. Just had one slice of pie for all 74 of them.
My go-to is a steak dinner.
I have a birding friend who was formerly a storm chaser. And he said that's a tradition in the storm chasing community. After a successful chase, you get a steak dinner.
That came from the movie Twister, where they sat down in the middle of chasing
Might be.
storms, and where one of the guys asked,
God, Meg, you got a lot of beef. Where'd you get all this beef?
Did you see my cows out front?
It's not.
Oh,
Oh, you slaughter your own cows, Meg. Nice.
so I definitely can identify with the storm chasers as well. I'm assuming that
Right.
bird chasing is a little less dangerous than storm chasing.
Yeah. And also a bit more common, I'd imagine. I feel like there's more birds to take than there are storms, hopefully. Yeah. And so I got that branch, and that was in early November. That was the bird that tied it for me. And it was after that, there was a dead period for a few weeks, which doesn't seem like that long of a dead period. But when you're in November, tied with the bird, you want to break it. it's a few weeks with nothing happening. It's stressful. Someone spotted a slaty back gull at the same place that I had found that Franklin's gull earlier in the year. Or really, I was with someone who found it, I should say. I made a joke actually to this person about, can you find me a Franklin's gull? And then about 15 seconds later, he had one in his scope. I was there when it was found. I might have willed it into existence, but I didn't really find myself. Went to get that slaty back gull.
Of course.
Exactly. I went and got that slaty back gull, and that was the record breaker for me. But there was a little bit of controversy because that I mentioned earlier, we had that southern lapwing, and it's still up in the air whether or not that was accepted by our state's record committee due to provenance. So if it isn't, then am I tied with the record? What's the situation now? So a few days after that slaty back gull, there was that black vulture up in northern Lower Peninsula that I chased up there and got that bird. I didn't at the time know would be my last bird of the year, but it was the one that was like, okay, now I can definitely say that even if that isn't accepted, I have 300 in the records, 335. And that was one of the, probably the high point of my year with that black vulture, because had been seen just flying around up near the tip of the Lower Peninsula. And that's basically all I had to go on. And I spent a full morning driving around up there without success. So I was deciding I was going to get some Subway for lunch. And as I was driving to the Subway, all of a sudden this bird comes over the tree line and I'm looking at it. First I thought it was a raven. That's not a raven. Turkey vulture. That's the black vulture.
Wow.
Did a U-turn real quick. It was awesome. Got on it. As I'm looking at that bird, that same guy I mentioned who was at the Brant, was the number 2 birder for the year, Joe Leeper. He drives by me as I'm looking at this black vulture. He stops the U-turn, pulls around. Hey, you're right there. And he got on it too. And it was like an exciting point. And after that, though, I hit that 337 number and I started thinking maybe 340 is possible, but then nothing happened the rest of the year, really. The only bird that I could have chased after was we had a 3-toed woodpecker reported on as far away as you could get. It's just south of Comfort Harbor in the Upper Peninsula. And I decided not to go. By that point, I had fully exhausted all of my finances for the year, couldn't really justify it. And no one ended up ever relocating the bird anyway.
I had that situation on December 30th. There was a bird in Newfoundland that was chaseable, and you were talking about sharp-tailed grouse. That should have been the easiest bird for me to get. And I assumed I would see them in Saskatchewan or Alberta. I never bothered in the winter 16-hour drive for a bird I was sure I was going to see out west. And I didn't see one. I drove through Manitoba. I drove through Saskatchewan. I drove through Alberta. The other grouse you could possibly get out there, but not the sharp-tailed grouse. Now it's December 29th, and I decide north, got the sharp-tailed grouse. Now it's the morning of December 30th. And okay, there's one more bird and maybe 2 in Newfoundland. And then I fly to Newfoundland, drive an hour and hope I see the bird on December 31st, and then fly on New Year's Eve, where I had used up all my money using excess funds for the gas and the hotel to go.
That's pretty much what I was doing too. I got myself in, not a lot, but a little bit of that late in the year, just because I was like pushing myself to get everything I could. And this year I've done a lot less traveling and a lot less birding. And I'm thinking sometime in the future of starting to bird more in Canada. I had that bounced around an idea in my head of doing the Great Lakes every big year, covering all of the states and provinces over Great Lake.
A Great Lakes big year where you just bird the periphery of the lake.
It'd still be a lot of travel, but it's pretty much all travel I could do by car. And I don't know how committed I would put myself to chasing everything. I have a feeling that even though I go into the year saying, I'm not going to do stupid stuff, I'm still going to end up doing some stupid stuff, because if I did do a county big year and end up breaking the state record, I clearly don't have the ability to stick to a small goal. But I think a Great Lakes area big year might be a big enough goal that I can restrain myself to it and stop myself from doing too many stupid things.
I'm the king of stupid things. I did a lot of them over the course of 3 different big years that I've done. Like for the Brant County, having never birded in the county before and having never thought of county birding as a thing, just because I've heard people, and you might have this experience too, where you're trying to will the Lapland longspur over to your side of the road that you can count it.
Exactly. And I've had a number of experiences with my dad. Like I said, he was a big county birder. And so I spent a lot of time with him county birding and had situations like that all the time where it's, all right, come on, I need this rough that I call it. Just fly off the tree you're perched in, across the road. That'd be perfect. Thank you.
We were in Texas for the Amazon Kingfisher. We got there and there was one other birder there. And it was pretty obviously what he was doing there even before we talked to him, because he's looking for the Rio Grande River. And now we've got the Amazon Kingfisher on the Mexico side. And yes, it was a lifer but we just were patient. We stood there for about an hour and a half and eventually flew close enough to the middle of the river that we said, okay, I think it's countable now. And then it disappeared and we realized, oh, it's landed on our side of the border. So we had to move around corners so that we could get a look at it. There are times where it's like when you're making your yard list, if you can see a bird while you're standing in your yard, even if it's not in your yard, we all count those as yard birds.
And it's one of those interesting controversies. If you're not doing a big year, if you're not focused on regional listing, it doesn't matter. It's the vast majority of people. That sort of thing doesn't matter to them. But then when you're looking at a parasitic Jaeger fly up the Canadian shore at Fort Huron, and I'm watching it, that was my first Jaeger of the year was on the Canadian side. And fortunately, later that same day, we had a couple fly. I was only American there at that time. Canadians on the other side, though, were posting them in Discord, which allowed me to spot them. We had one fly right over our side, over a lighthouse on our side. But most people, it's like, that's crazy. You're watching this bird. What do you mean it's going to count?
A lot of people with the limpkin, any other year I might have done that. They're standing in where they are, which is Ontario, and they were putting down the limpkin.
Right.
You have to change your list, like the black vulture situation. But for my Canada Big Year, had to wait till I saw it fly over the river.
Exactly. There's always that extra scrutiny on you when you're undergoing an endeavor like a big year. So things that people wouldn't normally question or care about, there's a bit of an extra eye on it.
Yes. You have to be confident enough in myself.
I experienced a little bit of that last year. Saw a Canada Jaeger, pecker. There's one traditional spot in Upper Peninsula we have for them. And I went and I got them there. And I just got fleeting looks at the Canada Jay for a very brief amount of time. And then this person was like very adamant. There's no way I saw a Canada Jay because he had been up there the day before and didn't get one. It's okay, but you know how birds work. And also, like I said, it's the spot to go. That place last year, there were probably 50 or 60 different reports of them there. And so it's, whatever. It's just birds, right?
What was the longest drive you did? How far did you go for one bird?
For one bird, my longest drive was the day that I got that king rail in Long-tailed Jaeger. Up at Whitefish Point, there was a Smith's longspur scene. I hopped in my car and I drove up there, got up there. Our recounter said, oh no, that bird was only here for a few minutes and then it was gone. So shoot, drove all the way back home. So that was a good 6 hours, 7 hours round trip, followed by in September, I'm standing at Port Huron, the day that I got my first confirmed Parasitic Jaeger, and they had another Smith's longspur at Whitefish Point. And this time it looked like it was going to stick around. So I hopped in my car again, drove the 3.5 hours up there just for that bird and 3.5 hours back. So it was 2 different 7-hour round trip drives for that one bird. That was probably the farthest for a single bird I ever went. For me, typical nemesis there was we had a really big year for Western tanagers last year in Michigan. In a typical year, we might have a few. This year, I don't think we've had any. Last year, I think we had 9 or 10 that made it onto eBird. And I chased after, I think it was 9 different Western tanagers, a total of 11 times last year, and missed all of them, missed several of them by just minutes, and also didn't chase after some that I would have gotten chasing after other birds. Like I chose to chase after a white-winged dove instead of Western tanager, ended up seeing another white-winged dove later in the year. Chose to chase after something else. I can't remember what it was instead of a Western tanager. I ended up seeing another one of later in the year. And the Western tanagers, and I was like, that bird was just laughing in my face all spring. So would not let me get one.
My experience driving up to Whitefish Point, we could drive for 2 hours and not see another car.
Pretty empty up there.
Yeah, we thought that was the best driving experience ever. Just no one's going up to Whitefish Point. Maybe one car comes back down.
Northern Michigan's great because there's like never any traffic.
Yeah.
The southern parts of the state where we get some stress, but up there's like nothing happening ever.
Which is good for birding because a lot of the birds you go to chase are probably up that way.
Especially Whitefish Point being the way it is.
So it was your bird that you did see that just took you forever to get?
Yeah, I've had a birds like that. Probably one of the best examples would be either purple sandpiper. I missed earlier. I got lucky late in the year with one of those, and red knots. I chased after a ton of red knots in the spring. Didn't end up getting one until August. Woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. Conveniently, I didn't even have my volume on. Looked at it, saw there was a report of a red knot about a mile away, right on a beach that's a very high public traffic beach. And I knew once people started getting there for the day, the bird would be gone. Probably was 2 minutes between I woke up the time I was in my car, made it out there and got that bird. And that was an extremely gratifying nemesis to get. And I've seen another couple of those actually doing my lake watches later in the year. So
did you feel like it was a numbers game at one point where it was more important to these 3 kind of common birds as opposed to one really rare bird?
I didn't have too many incidents like that where I was skipping out on a rare bird to go after more common birds. Somewhat late in the year when I was still missing a Tony and Godwit, a situation where there was a Tony and Godwit half across the state would have been I was up at Whitefish Point. I would have been about 5 hours west and then the extra 5 hours plus my 4-hour drive home. So it would have been a good 14-hour driving day. But there were a few other okay birds, but I decided not to go for the Tony and Godwit and go for those birds instead. And I ended up not getting those birds either. I ended up getting all of them later on in the year. I had Tony and Godwit later in the year, but I skipped on the Tony and Godwit and didn't get those birds. But that was a little bit of a numbers game kind of thing. But that was mostly a financial numbers game situation where I was like, the odds of another Tony and Godwit showing up were probably good enough to not drive the extra 10 hours of driving, $100, $200 of gas, however much it would have been. Because that was, at that point, shooting gas was like $4 a gallon or something like that. And it was like, all right.
And obviously at the end of the year, you were satisfied, you broke the record. And now I'm sure there's other birders gunning for you at some point. What advice would you give to birders who are doing state big years, whether it's someone trying to break your record in Michigan or anyone else doing a state big year?
Biggest thing is planning. I didn't go into the year planning at all, obviously. And like I said, I was mostly focused on month birding early in the year. So I was doing stupid stuff like trying to fly across the state for a surf skilter or for the first stilt sandpiper showed up of the year. I raced down to get that, even though it would become fairly common in migration. Birds like that there was no point for me to waste my time, so to speak, chasing after. And that would be the biggest takeaway is don't do stupid things to get the easy birds. At the same time, I think that anyone can do a big year. I really think that the bigger scale, the more expensive it's going to be. And so not necessarily everyone could do a ABA or a United States or a Canada big year because not everyone is able to really do that. But on the state level, I really got off pretty cheap in the grand scheme of things. I don't know exactly how much money I spent, probably too much, but really what it takes is energy. Be prepared to not have plans. If like anytime I had a social obligation, it's my brother's birthday and I'm going with my parents to go to brother's house and have a birthday dinner, that was like stressful to me because it was like, what if something shows up? What if the day that I got that red knot, I had to pick my brother up from my grandma's house? He was visiting from New Mexico. He was staying at my grandma's house. And fortunately, the red knot showed up earlier in the day that I was able to get it and then go and take care of those obligations. But just those sort of things were like, you have to be prepared.
Did you miss any family or social engagement?
I missed Mother's Day up north chasing something. I believe I was even with my dad that day. I think my dad and I both spent Mother's Day, which is really great. I also missed family gatherings. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't one of the major ones, but it was just that we were going to be going to my grandma's house and there was a bird put up that I was like, I should go get this bird. I'll try to make it there later in the day. Other than that, I was lucky in that the days that I did have obligations, I didn't necessarily have to bail on them too frequently.
For me, being a rare bird chaser has been helpful to me. It's, oh, he's not coming to Christmas dinner. Yeah, he's got to chase a bird.
Convenient excuse.
At this point, because of my mental health issues, my family understand.
I have never been diagnosed with ADHD. As I learn more and more about some of the symptoms of ADHD, especially in adults who have not been diagnosed, especially like a lot of the social sort of things of it where I have a hard time. If I'm not trying to listen to what someone is saying, I can hear it no problem. When I'm trying to pay attention to what someone's saying, it's way harder for me.
You should be in a restaurant with Sue and me when I'm listening to every stupid conversation around me and thinking, oh my God, would they just shut up and don't listen to them? Listen to me. I can't not listen to them. They're just
exactly.
There's always a table in a restaurant where there's 6 people. You can't hear any of them except for one guy. And that will just absolutely turn me into a maniac. But it is good as an adult to get diagnosed and to understand you can go out and be a birder and you're going to run into a lot of people that kind of feel the same way you do. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell me about your amazing non-intentional Michigan big year and break the record.
I've always been a little bit of a competitive person, not necessarily competing to win, but competing with myself, where every single time I go out for a walk, trying to see how many birds I can get on that walk's checklist, like those sort of things. And I think that the big year was a very natural thing for me. It fell right in line with that. And I think something I definitely want to do again, both on the county scale, on the Michigan scale, like I mentioned before, that the idea of that Great Lakes area big year, doing an ABA big year, trying to go for somewhere in the high 600s, maybe even hit that crazy 700 number. But That's a long ways off in the thought process. I think probably be another Michigan one. In the meantime, I've gotten back into month birding a little bit. Last year, when I was doing my big year, focused on month birding earlier in the year, I broke what I'm aware of are the state records for February, March, April, and May for big months. And I think for the foreseeable future, I'm just going to choose a month every year and just trying to break that month's big month's record. Probably when I go for the January record is when I'm going to end up doing another big year, because the January record is 145, 146, which is a crazy number. Like I said, I was at 121 last year. It's unbelievable. I was driving all over the place in January too. When I go for that record, it'll probably take a year where we're having a mild winter with lots of rarities hanging around at the end of the year. From there, it'll probably just be instinct will kick in and I'll just keep chasing everything and do another one and trying to go for my own record or go for the record if someone breaks my record between now and then. I think with the increase of technology, things like Discord, instantaneous exact on birds, records are going to continue to be broken across the board. Like Sandy Camito did his record.
No, that's what I was just thinking about that before we talked. When Sandy Camito set his record, and it wasn't until 2013 that Neil Hayward broke it, there were 100 more birds on the ABA list, and rare bird alerts were a dime a dozen. Yeah, it actually makes you realize how hard Sandy Camito worked to get the numbers that he got.
Just like last year, I think it was Victor and Ruben Stoll.
Yeah.
The Stoll brothers, they broke Sandy Camito's ABA record just in the lower 48.
Yes.
Which is unbelievable.
It's interesting because they also broke
Charity Kirsten.
Yeah. And I was like, oh man, they couldn't give her like just a few years of having that AB lower 40 record.
I just had Tiffany as my guide, Texas, for the Brown Jays at Santa Margarita Ranch in May. Just before then, last year, I met Jeremy Dominguez, who was the one who Tiffany broke his record.
Oh, okay. To meet people like that, because there's a little extra bit of fanboy in you that goes, ooh, wow.
That was when I met Jeremy. Somehow the conversation got brought up that I was doing Michigan Big Year. And he was like, oh, I did a big year once. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And how'd you do? I broke the lower 48 record. I was like, oh, didn't even know that who I was talking to.
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure talking to you. And I wish you a lot of success.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a good one. Happy birthday.
So, don't tell anyone, but I'm seriously tempted to steal Danny's idea for a grand tour of the Great Lakes Big Year. Yeah, that's it. Has a nice ring to it. Grand Tour of the Great Lakes Big Year. And if someone else gets to it before Danny or me, feel free to take the title for yourself. Perhaps it will be the start of a new kind of big year. Who says it has to be a state or county or even start on January 1st? Well, the record keepers for the ABA area might have a thing or two to say about it if you want an official title. But what the heck, do what you want. If you want your big year to start on your birthday, go for it. Or perhaps your wedding anniversary. In that case, it will probably be your last wedding anniversary, unless of course your spouse is as rabid a big year birder as you are. In that case, have at it. More and more couples or brothers or even best friends are teaming up to do big years. 4 eyes and ears are better than 2 of each, and you get to split the driving and the hotel bills. That reminds me that a future episode will feature local Brant County birders Ellen and Jerry Horak, who, as of this date, are 3/4 of the way through their Ontario Big Year. In 2023, they did a Brant County Big Year and will be heading out across the country next year together to see if they can count over 400 species during their 2025 Canada Big Year. I'll look forward to hearing how easy or perhaps hard it is to bird everywhere, every day together with your spouse or best friend. If you are doing a big year like that, let me know. Of course, that's another show. So until next time, I bid you farewell and fair weather. Or nasty weather if you like chasing rare birds, blown in by a storm. And now, as I sit here on my back deck, darkness settling in and the bugs beginning to bite, I must head inside and prepare dinner for Sue, who must be wondering what the heck I'm doing sitting in the dark talking to myself while she sits inside, not getting any less hungry. Oh, and of course, may the birds be with you. Always.